Hello Void and all who inhabit it, it's me and my research librarian turtleneck. It's actually quite hot, so we're gonna hopefully make this brief. I focus mostly on TV on this channel, but I am first and foremost an avid reader. Given how many books are being adapted and have been adapted to the screen, it was inevitable that I made my way back to talking about fiction. Today, this amalgamation of interests brings us back to the world of questioning romantic subplots and storylines, but specifically in YA fiction. Young adult or YA romance fiction first emerged as a genre in the 1950s, but the resurgence in the early 2000s has led to a recent influx of stories focusing on teenage girls falling in love. If we consider that the adult romance genre started as a platform centering women, it makes sense that young adult romance fiction would in turn focus on girls. But what pulls my interest, especially in the scope of this series, is that even though there are distinctly young adult romance stories, there's a wide overlap of major romance subplots taking place in stories of any genre that feature a main heroine. I'll be referencing a lot of articles that look at dystopian novels specifically, aka the promised land of the chosen one plotline, but if you are reading any YA novel and the main character is a girl, you low-key have to go out of your way to not find a story that centers romance. And I want to know why, specifically in the context of heroines choosing between two love interests. Picture it, a post-apocalyptic potential future, or maybe an alternate but still familiar reality that relies on a color-coded skill-based system of identity marking. Either way, bleak, hope is lost, or things are on the verge of becoming really awful. Enter the chosen one. Likely a small town nobody with minimal exposure to the world, they possess an unharnessed, potentially rare ability that will save us all. Along the way, they'll meet a mentor, make friends, and maybe even fall in love. If our chosen one is a boy, he may be given a partner as a condition of his status, a guaranteed love interest via the one girl who will join on the journey. An old subversion of this trope is in the original Star Wars trilogy, which starts on this path having Luke and Leia kiss in episode 4, but later reveals that they are siblings in episode 6. Harry Potter also tries to dodge this trope by having Hermione pair with Ron instead of Harry. But the lone girl of the golden trio ending up with the best friend instead of the chosen one, if anything, further points to the insistence that these women and girls' storylines end with them romantically partnered. This is a trope which ends up impacting female protagonists as well. Because if our chosen one is a girl, romance most definitely will be happening to her. It's a requirement of the journey at this point. We see so many plot lines that are driven by the intense love felt between two teens, and more specifically, the impact that love has on the teen girl in the partnership. In their article, Vampires and Witches Go to School, Contemporary Young Adult Fiction, Gender, and the Goth, Michelle J. Smith and Christine Maruzzi examine the way Gothic school stories explore the sexual and romantic desires of their female protagonists. They write that by emphasizing the romance, these novels reinforce heteronormative patriarchal ideologies that privilege love over learning and safety. I'd go further to say that many of these stories make love an integral part of the learning. The relationship is necessary for the heroine to be placed in numerous situations or to be motivated at varying points along the story. Often, a major conflict of the plot is reflected in the main character's love options, which we'll talk about later, but Sarah K. Day also writes about the trope of rebellion being sparked by or directly connected to sexual awakenings. If it wasn't for this romance, our chosen girl may have never made a major decision in her journey or even started on her path in the first place. Take, for example, the Mara Dyer trilogy, which is about a teen girl with inexplicable powers whose main motivation for almost the entire series is to maintain her romantic relationship. The third book, wherein Mara's major goal for like 75% of the plot is to find her boyfriend Noah, is a great example of a teen heroine whose trajectory is explicitly connected to her love life. Speaking of Mara Dyer and the trend of choosing love over safety, someone had asked me to talk about the trend of sacrificing others for a doomed love. This is not a fully formed answer to that, but while we see this behavior in grown men quite often, in positive and negative ways, teen boys don't frequently get stories that expect a similar level of commitment and or turmoil. Teen girls, though, baby, the fate of the world is resting in your relationship. So many teen girls are driven by romance because they exist in stories that directly connect their desires to the well-beings of those around them. Their desire is a danger to others in a way that requires regulation and taming almost. What's odd is that even with the threat of untamed sexual energy, these girls often get a happily ever after with the person of their desires. Cautionary tales about choosing one person over the group often look at self-centered excess or an unwillingness to move on that threatens others. But teen girls are encouraged to sacrifice other people for their love, or to find ways to sacrifice themselves, usually their wants or their safety, in order to have both a relationship and a stable universe. The message being sent is that this first love is worth keeping no matter what. Which brings us to chastity. In an article on marriage plots in young adult fiction, Sarah K. Day describes Judy Blume's Forever as resisting didactic messages about premarital sex and rejecting traditions that demand romances end in romance, or at least the expression of permanent commitment. But since that 1975 novel, there has been a backslide in the number of stories that allow teen girls to fall in love and or have sex without then being tied to that partner indefinitely. YA novels and stories, especially for teen girls, encourage exploration and agency, but they do so still within the confines of purity culture. I'm using purity culture to vaguely refer to the restrictive sex norms placed on women and teen girls, not specifically the evangelical Christian movement, by the way. There's a catch to these stories. These girls do have a level of agency, but they are inevitably restricted by the addition of romance to their stories. To be clear, I'm not saying that having romance in stories about teen girls is bad, but rather that there are limitations to how these stories proceed because of how romance is formed and presented. 9 times out of 10, the first person we see the heroine fall in love with is the only person she's allowed to be with, is the only person she is allowed to explore her sexuality with and truly invest in. Just jumping in really quickly to say, sometimes the person who sparks the main character's sexual awakening is also her first love. Sometimes it's a different dude, but the first person she falls in love with after her sexual awakening has been initiated is usually the same person who we see her end the story with, despite whatever tension exists, especially if the person who sparked her sexual awakening is somebody else. From this, there is a frequently voiced concern about reinforcing expectations around marriage for teen girls. Melissa Ames and Sarah Burkon, as quoted by Sarah K. Day, noted that rom-coms have been restructured for younger audiences, allowing for the consumption of certain messages about dating and marriage by teens and preteens. Day, who, if it wasn't clear, I'm now a big fan of, looks at the potential impact of such stories in an article analyzing sexual awakenings in dystopian YA fiction. There's a point where she's talking about the tendency of this genre to focus on skinny straight white girls all around the same age, experiencing the same kind of romance, and she says the sexual awakenings and resultant social resistance embodied by these female protagonists then reinforces contemporary cultural expectations of young women's coming of age rather than offering a potential divergence from such gendered limitations. Dystopian fiction is meant to make cultural commentary on our current reality through the presentation of alternatives. But when it comes to romance, these stories are instead presenting the same values we already know as values to keep. Ideas like a first love should be your forever love and your long-term commitment should mirror a marriage run parallel to, if not reinforce, real-life messages from abstinence-only education. We see an emphasis on the impact of these female characters' romantic relationships, an onus of sexual responsibility that, again, is not seen in boys. And it's not that I want to see teen boys experience the same bullshit regulations, but where is the resistance to the status quo when inevitably you are buying back into more traditional ideas about sexual agency? Placing these real-life expectations in a fantastical landscape where the subjected girl can thwart or reject them can be liberating. But the means by which that rejection is done, the ending, which often includes a quasi-marriage at 18, can reinvest in the same limited system that the story is allegedly challenging. Pair all of this with the view of sexual awakening as a hallmark of coming of age or coming to maturity, and the result is an emphasis on romance that can be just as restrictive and formulaic as it is empowering. Chastity, or specifically actively withholding sex, has long been presented to women and teen girls as a means of having power. But chaste is often used interchangeably with purity as a means of regulating behavior. We can see this outside of fictional media with things like the emphasis on women's virginity and the number of sexual partners that a woman has had. Women and girls have two choices. Deciding to share your body with someone else is powerful. Choose wisely and sparingly. Or you've shared your body with too many people. That power and your worth has now disintegrated. A story seeking to have a respectable, admirable girl hero who experiences romance throughout her journey has no option, really. Our chosen girl cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, become a slut. This is for minors, after all, and there's a whole hotline out there for irritated parents to request your book to be banned should it be too spicy. But as we just discussed, a major hallmark of this genre is to place main characters in situations where they are given the ability to choose, often with the layer of a sexual awakening. Enter the love triangle. The love triangle is a setup where desire and temptation can be explored, but at a small, structured scale. In their chapter on sex and romance in dystopian young adult fiction, authors Brian Gillis and Joanna Simpson write that these books contain surprisingly little graphic sexual content. Instead, authors create sexual tone and mood by placing their characters in situations of extreme want and need. Let's get these teen hearts beating faster and faster, as the Greek chorus would say, but this quote also reveals two key things. First, we see an emphasis on angst over sexual behavior that falls in line with this need to maintain an allure of chastity. You can be as horny as you like as long as you don't do anything sexual until you decide who you want to be with forever. And two, we see an emphasis on tension that works really well when you place a character in a position to be pulled in two opposite romantic directions. Having a triangle also alleviates some of the pressure of having the main relationship so obviously be driving the plot. That happens very frequently in stories where the main character just has one love interest. If either option in the love triangle represents opposite sides of the moral dilemma the protagonist is dealing with, then the struggle to choose can be seen as a reflection of the larger issue at hand. The romance works within the conflict instead of being a disruption. However, within this, there is a very common aspect of faux agency. This happens especially when the protagonist's sexual awakening is connected to the conflict. The right choice is obvious even if tension and angst suggest otherwise. Our heroine will not choose to be with her enemy unless he switches sides. And even then, she can still, and I feel like very often are seen having the reaction of,
I'm so glad you changed your mind. I'm still gonna pick this dude who was on the side that I wanted the whole time now.
We can look at Zelly from Children of Blood and Bone or Alina in Shadow and Bone, who both experience attraction to the literal enemy, feel conflicted because of that desire, and then are given or recognize that there is another option closer to the morality that they are comfortable with. Zelly's story is still in progress, so we'll have to see what she decides, but Alina, spoiler alert, chooses Mao at the end of the day. And it's high-key obvious that he's the only viable option to her after Prince Caspian is revealed as an immortal wannabe dictator. The triangle is another place where prevailing culture norms can be reinforced. Who is the no option and how they are framed that way reflects not just the moral dilemma facing the protagonist, but the moral messaging that is meant to be left with the audience. In The Hunger Games, Gale becomes an angry, dangerous militant. In Twilight, the racist author depicts not only Jacob, but the entire Quellet nation through demeaning and harmful portrayals. Sometimes it's not just being incompatible, but being a stand-in for a trait or set of traits that the author wants to mark as negative at a higher level. However, making a choice obvious in one way or another doesn't always work. Audiences are still enticed by the boy who won't be chosen, by the unrealized potential of series-long sexual tension. And in this clash between audience desires, we get the creation of teams. Base your consumption of the story in who you want the main character to end up with. Align yourself with others who feel just as strongly. We've talked about audience investment in fictional love lives before, and this is just another iteration of that. YA is perhaps a more potent landscape for extreme investment because of the adolescent audience's developing identities, making it easier for them to latch on to a system of houses or districts or factions or anything that can be used as a self-identifier. In this, love triangles are appealing as a way to mash two potatoes with one fork. Audiences are given a new set of source-specific identity markers, and investment in the main character's love life, something we're already prone to do, can be heightened due to uncertainty. Day, Ames, and Burkon, who I referenced earlier, all speak to the potential of cookie-cutter endings, leading to more teens questioning the desirability of such relationships. We aren't yet at the impact portion of today's video, but I do think it's important to note that consumption of certain images may not cause us to invest in them, but rather to actively reject them. However, that rejection can be followed with a desire for a replacement. So while I'm not advocating for quasi-marriages for LGBTQ plus fictional teens, there is a want for stories about queer chosen ones who get to experience love and care throughout their journeys as well. Currently, the potential for queer exploration as it comes to chosen one stories is not often considered. Off the top of my head, I know of Girls of Paper and Fire and We Unleash the Merciless Storm as examples of stories about a queer chosen one with an epic romance that directly connects to the conflict, though there aren't any love triangles. And regardless, the bulk of YA stories feature the same types of girls experiencing the same types of romances, which also relates to reinforcing current beauty standards, by the way. Because something I didn't talk about is the trope of these nearly physically identical protagonists always being like,
I'm so plain, no one would ever want me.
And then getting two extremely hot options when they're on the cusp of maturity. Anyway, when we consider dystopian fiction specifically being a genre for confronting current gaps in society, and YA in general being a frontier for agency and exploration, it's odd to me that the trend-setting novels aren't more often about more marginalized identities in a non-tragic way. It can often feel like across genre and age range, to be honest, marginal identities exist to be a plot point instead of a reality of people's lives. These characters should be queer not as a gimmick or an after-school special, but simply because they are. Another layer to this when it comes to romance is stories trending towards investing in heteronormative romance conventions, not just in the relationships that are centered, but in the way these relationships are formed and maintained. In the study, Queer Challenges to Heteronormative Courtship Practices, Ellen Lamont found that respondents to their study rejected heteronormative behavior through acts like emphasizing constant communication, evaluation, and negotiation of the relationship, and non-gendered care work. We are given an understanding of what heteronormative conventions are, / how they are perceived as highly gendered, performative, and inequitable through the acts that are created in direct opposition. When we look at the courtship behaviors and relationship traits presented in YA stories, the need to move away from heteronormative conventions in part means creating and supporting stories that present different understandings of partnership, similarly to the respondents in Lamont's survey. Because just like the quasi-marriages that reinvest in traditional sexual agency, a young adult relationship that is less egalitarian, for example, that clearly defines one person as the emotional worker and the other as the provider of material benefits, for example, can reinforce heteronormative concepts of courtship and partnering, even if the relationship is between two queer teens. So, it's not just swap out Edward for Eleanor, but consider what other ideals are being formed, what messages about romance and partnership are being sent to the children. After all that, it's time to finally ask, do we see a level of exploration and agency and satisfaction when we just slap romance into any YA story? Kinda. On one hand, the exploration is timed. This trope sets up the expectation that by the end of the trilogy or the series, our heroine will have made her lifelong decision out of limited options. There's questions here about how much did they actually get to explore, how much is their romance about agency as opposed to inevitably participating in old familiar scripts about how relationships are meant to progress. But at the same time, the existence of sexual awakenings in these stories, the way that romance and love and a deep connection is folded so deeply into the plot of the journey, for a lot of audience members, that is the first time they get to see and understand those desires in themselves. That's exploration. That's providing a sense of agency and satisfaction both to the character and to the audience. I wish we dug a bit deeper, but I can't deny the connection that so many teen girls especially have had in getting to watch or read through a character's own exploration of self and what it is that she wants and how it is she's going about those things. So then, what's the impact of romantic subplots in stories where love is not at the center? Well, for one, I don't know if that exists in YA. Like, even stories that aren't about love inevitably include major love plots, but I'll say it's a catch-22. Because, again, teens need stories that explore relationships, but the repetitive structure can mean that there isn't much or really any exploration. If you enjoy reading young adult novels and have read them at any point in the past 20 years, you've probably had a moment where you felt like a character was reduced just to their romance, where you may have asked, why does their growth have to be connected to love? Or at least I did. I don't know. I won't speak for you. But for me, there were moments where it felt like, why is this like what her life boils down to? And I saw this really interesting post on Tumblr because I know for a fact a lot of people felt this way about Katniss. And at the end of the series, because she marries, I'm going to say his name wrong. I was going to say Petra. I was going to say Peter. She marries that boy and they have kids, and people were like, this is whack as fuck. Like, I thought we were leading up to something different. But this Tumblr post I saw, which I'm not going to be able to find because it's a hell site, it's not easy to search, but the author, the poster, was talking about how Katniss's ending is actually really strong because the point isn't that she decided to settle, but rather that she got to a point where she had healed enough in her trauma that she cared to invest in her future and decided to build a family because she cared enough about what was happening down the line that she wanted to invest in it. And to that extent as well, Katniss's ending is like kind of not bleak, but it's not like perfect. And that's also the point. Like, you're not going to heal from trauma in a day. Like, that is a process. And again, part of her healing process is feeling like, I care enough about my future that I'm willing to invest in it. And one of the ways that she sought to invest was to have kids. Hopefully I can find the post because I'm probably butchering it. But my point here is that is a very different perspective of love and romance and marriage, right? Having a lifelong commitment than Twilight, or To All the Boys I Loved Before, or any number of young adult fiction, whether it be specifically romance or not, that seeks to have the main character end in a happily ever after by high school graduation. In that way, these stories, one more time for the people in the back, reinvest in traditional sexual behavior for women and girls that really doesn't encourage you to explore. It encourages you to find that one true love who you'll likely find on the first try, and you just marry him before you can even vote. You marry him too. Like, that's, again, it's very hetero, it's very limited, and I think there are some stories that can present an ending that on its face looks to be the same, but underneath is actually doing other things. And there are a lot of stories that don't. Like, no, this is what you want. You want the happily ever after cookie cutter ending. I didn't talk about teen boys that much in this video, but as a reminder, boys need love and emotional intimacy and space to grow and emotional intelligence as well. Not necessarily through desiring quasi-marriages, but I think another impact of this hyper focus of giving teen girls romance, irrespective of what the story is actually supposed to be about, like having a romance be a major part of their story. Another impact of that is telling audiences who it is who should be caring about love and romance, and the extent at which they should be caring about those things, which has a detrimental impact on all of us, just in varying ways. And even in saying that, I can't deny that we engage with stories for a release, an escape, a way to gain understanding for ourselves and each other, all of the above, a mixture of the three, and so many other reasons that are totally disconnected from critical thought. Like, I'm here for a good time, not a long time. And for a lot of young adults, that necessitates some level of romance in said stories. Sexual awakenings will happen, end of the fictional world be damned. And again, the repetition of some tropes may push audiences to reject similar structures in their own life and look for something different. It's not guaranteed that because you watch Twilight at 14, you now want to get married before you're 18. You know what I mean? You might have had the foresight at 14 to be like, this is actually some bullshit. I don't want that. And I applaud you for that, but I will still be questioning what it means to have stories about teen girls budding agency and power so frequently revolve around romance-driven decisions, so frequently end with teen girls choosing their forever partner so soon in life. I will still wonder how much we are telling teen girls and grown women to completely connect their power to their romantic love, how much we are limiting options and saying that it's freedom. If you made it to the end, thank you for making it to the end. If you're here because Feek sent you, hello, welcome. New or old, do you read young adult fiction? Have you noticed any shifts in the way that romance is portrayed? Do you have any recommendations? I know some of my examples are older, but some of them, like specifically Twilight and The Hunger Games, but also some of those other vampire novels that were quoted in, or that were used in the article about gothic fiction, they set up trends in the genre that were really prominent, again, like towards the beginning of the resurgence of young adult romance fiction. So I wanted to keep them anyway. I'm still scatterbrained. Also, my uploading schedule is fucked because I need to work on time management, and that's not going so well. But my goal is still to have 2 videos a month, so you will hopefully see me again before the end of September. Until then, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next echo chamber.